Okay, let's dive deep. This is the Deep Dive, the show where we take the material you provide, your articles, research, notes, and really get into it.
Yeah, exactly. Our mission is pretty simple, isn't it?
It is. We're here to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight from whatever you share with us.
Giving you that well-informed shortcut, kind of, without getting totally bogged down in information overload.
Precisely. We act as your guides through this specific information landscape you've put together for us.
We synthesize, connect the dots, highlight what really jumps out from these sources you've given us today.
And today, June 6th, 2025, we have a really fascinating stack of sources. It gives us a snapshot of India's daily pulse on that specific day.
Right. This isn't just a general flyover. It's a focused look based only on the headlines you put in front of us.
And it's quite a cross-section, really. Shows the breadth of national life.
It really does. We're touching on, well, everything. High-stakes cricket leadership changes. A really tragic stampede.
Yeah, stemming from a public gathering.
And then the potential ripples of, U.S. policy on India's economy.
Plus intense domestic political debates over a military operation.
Uh-huh. And even fundamental questions about future political representation, shifts in global manufacturing.
Strategic defense partnerships, big economic policy decisions.
And even a very public, long-running legal saga. It's quite the mix.
It absolutely is. Cover so many different spheres.
So our goal today is to unpack each of these headlines from your sources.
Pull out the crucial details, understand the context, and figure out what insights can we really extract from this specific moment in time?
Exactly. This deep dive is custom tailored just for you, based purely on the information you shared.
Right. Let's open up this material and see what we find.
All right, let's kick things off on the pitch. We're talking Indian cricket.
Okay.
Your sources bring us to a pretty significant transition. You've got the new India Test captain, Shubman Gill, and the head coach, Gautam Gambhir.
Right, their first major press conference together. Exactly. This was just before the big 5-match test series against England. It happened in Mumbai, series starting June 20th.
So this isn't just a formality, is it? It's their first real public statement as a leadership pair.
Absolutely. And what's interesting from your source is how Gill talked about his captaincy style.
Yeah. What did he say?
Well, he acknowledged it'll evolve, but he really emphasized communication and fostering strong bonds within the team right from the get-go.
That's interesting. Communication and bonding.
Yeah, and he specifically framed it as creating a sense of security for the players.
Okay, that focus on culture and, psychological safety,
Yeah.
that's notable for a young captain stepping into such a massive role.
It really is. Suggests he's thinking about building a cohesive unit, not just tactics or individual stats.
Right, building that team environment first. And what about Gambhir, the coach?
Well, he gave some concrete details too, especially around managing key players. Your source highlights the plan for Jasprit Bumrah.
Ah, Bumrah. Always crucial. What's the plan?
He won't play all 5 tests. It's clear workload management for their star fast bowler.
Makes sense. Long series.
Yeah, and the source notes, his selection for, I think it was 3 matches, will actually depend on how the series is going.
Oh, really? So it's results dependent, too.
Seems like it. Which brings up that classic challenge, right? Balancing the immediate need to win versus long-term player fitness.
Definitely. Especially for someone as vital as Bumrah. Managing his workload is key, but making it contingent on series results adds a pragmatic layer. It's not just pre-planned rest.
And Gill, he also addressed his own form in the presser. The source reports this.
Oh, yeah. What did he say about his recent test struggles?
He admitted it, acknowledged the struggles, but then, refocused the conversation. Said his priority is just scoring runs that help the team win.
Classic leadership response. Acknowledge, but pivot to the team goal. And Gambhir, did he talk about the pressure?
He did. Very upfront about the immense pressure of coaching India. Said it's constant, doesn't matter what you've achieved in the past.
That's honest, because the expectations in India are just astronomical. Admitting the pressure is maybe a way to manage it, set a realistic tone.
Could be. It certainly underlines the intensity they're stepping into. Now, here's a detail that really jumped out from the source for me.
What's that?
Gambhir specifically mentioned Karun Nair's county cricket experience in England.
Karun Nair. He's back in the squad.
He is, after 8 years. And Gambhir cited his county stint as a key reason for the recall.
8 years. Wow. That's incredible persistence. But citing county cricket specifically, What does that tell us?
Well, it suggests they value that experience, right? Performing in English conditions, different opposition, the demands of multi-day cricket there.
Yeah, it signals that performance outside the usual domestic setup is being noticed, and maybe they're looking for players proven to adapt to tough overseas conditions.
Exactly. It's a nod to resilience and adaptability gained elsewhere.
Interesting. Rewarding that kind of experience.
And one more thing from this press conference, tying into a later source we need to discuss. Gambhir reacted to the tragic Bengaluru stadium stampede.
Oh, he commented on that already.
Yeah, your source says he spoke about it. Condemned the need for road shows, stressed public safety must come first. He even suggested future celebrations maybe need to be in more controlled environments.
That's quite a statement. A prominent sports figure directly linking a public safety failure to how sports celebrations are often done.
It brings a personal tragedy right into the public discourse, suggesting policy changes. Shows how connected these big events and safety protocols are.
Absolutely. So this first source, it's not just about cricket strategy. It's leadership philosophy, player management, pressure, unexpected recalls, and even connecting to broader public safety issues.
A really rich starting point based on what you gave us. Okay, so let's move directly to that tragic event Gambhir mentioned. The next source dives into the devastating details of the Bengaluru stadium stampede. This was June 4th, 2025.
Yeah, during the victory parade for Royal Challengers, Bengaluru's IPL win.
The source paints a really grim picture. 11 people dead, over 45 injured.
Just horrific. And it happened right outside the M. Shinnaswamy Stadium where the celebration was centered.
What immediately stands out, and it's chilling, is the crowd size versus the stadium capacity. The source says over 2.5 lakh fans. That's 250,000 people gathered outside.
250,000. And the stadium holds, what, 35,000?
Exactly. The sheer scale of that mismatch, it just overwhelmed everything.
Any crowd control plan would buckle under that pressure. That disparity is absolutely critical to understanding how things went so wrong.
And the source points to another potential factor. Rumors. Rumors spreading about free entry into the stadium.
Oh, that could definitely fuel a surge towards the gates. Shows the danger of misinformation in crowded, maybe tense situations, especially now with how fast rumors can spread online.
The official response seems to have been strong and swift, according to your source. The Karnataka High Court took suo motu cognizance.
Right, meaning they initiated the legal case themselves because it was such a serious matter of public importance.
Yeah, and during the urgent hearing, they raised concerns about inadequate crowd control, even though there were apparently over 1,000 police personnel there.
So numbers weren't necessarily the issue, maybe the deployment or the plan?
Possibly. And a state cabinet minister even called for an FIR, that's a first information report, kicking off a police investigation.
Against who?
Against the RCB management and officials from the Karnataka State Cricket Association, KSCA, for alleged negligence.
Okay, so the court's proactive involvement, the call for an FIR against organizers, it all points towards a serious investigation into accountability. Were the right plans in place? Were they followed? Who's responsible?
Exactly. It signals potential legal consequences.
Meanwhile, on the welfare side, what's being done for the victims?
RCB announced financial aid, 10 lakh per deceased family, and started an RCV Cares Fund for the injured.
Okay, some immediate support.
And the state's chief minister pledged free medical treatment for everyone injured, covering costs in both government and private hospitals.
Those are crucial steps. Doesn't fix the cause, but vital support for those affected right now.
Your source also gives a medical update. Most injured are discharged, but 2 remain hospitalized. One is a 14-year-old boy with a serious eye injury.
Ah, that really brings home the human cost, doesn't it? Such specific, tragic details.
It does. And the High Court's decision is expected next Tuesday, so the legal process is moving quickly.
That court decision will be one to watch. Could set precedents for event management across India.
And circling back to Gambhir's comments from the first source, his criticism of road shows, the call for controlled environments.
Yeah, seen in light of these details, his comments gain a lot more weight. It sounds like a direct lesson being drawn or needing to be drawn from this tragedy.
Absolutely. This event, as your source lays it out, is forcing a national conversation about event safety. It might lead to much stricter rules for large public gatherings.
Especially those big, spontaneous celebrations.
For you listening, this is just a stark reminder of how critical good crowd management and safety planning are. For any large event,
Makes you think about responsibility, prevention, the power of rumors, and the awful consequences when things go wrong. A tragic but vital lesson from these sources.
Okay, shifting gears quite dramatically now, but still looking at things impacting millions of people. Our next source looks at the potential economic effects on India from a proposed tax in the U.S.
Right. This is about Donald Trump's proposed 3.5% tax on remittances.
Part of something called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, according to the source. Who exactly would this tax hit?
It targets foreign workers in the U.S. sending money home. That includes people on H-1B visas, even green card holders. And specifically, it taxes the money sent through formal channels, like banks or money transfer services.
And this is a huge deal for India because
Because India is the world's #1 recipient of remittances, your source says India received a massive $119 billion in 2023.
wow, $119 billion, and a lot of that comes from the U.S.
A very significant chunk, yes, which highlights just how critical these remittances are for India's economy. The source calls them the most stable source of foreign exchange.
Stable foreign exchange, okay. But it's more than just national finances, right?
Oh, absolutely. At the household level, these funds are vital for millions. They cover essential costs, education, healthcare, housing. So a tax directly impacts family budgets and well-being.
And what's the potential negative impact on that stability the source mentions?
Well, a key concern is that it could push people towards informal, untraceable ways of sending money.
Ah, so bypassing the taxed formal channels.
Exactly. If the official routes get more expensive, people might look for alternative, maybe carrying cash, using informal networks. That makes it harder for the government to track the money, potentially undermining that stable source of foreign currency.
The sources give some context here. India has been the top recipient since 2008, and its share of global remittances has actually grown from 11% in 2001 to 14% in 2024.
And the Indian migrant population globally has shot up to 18.5 million in 2024, up from 6.6 million in 1990.
And importantly, the source notes many Indian migrants in the U.S. are highly skilled. Over 78% work in high-earning fields like science, business, arts.
That's a crucial detail. These aren't just small amounts covering basic needs. Often there's significant sums supporting extended families, maybe even fueling local investment back in India. A tax hits this group directly.
So what are economists predicting if this tax actually happens?
Your source cites forecasts of a pretty significant drop in remittances to India, somewhere between 10% and 15%.
Which translates to
Roughly $12 billion to $18 billion annually. That kind of reduction could put real pressure on the Indian rupee against the dollar.
ouch. And that pressure affects everyone, right? Makes imports pricier, could nudge inflation.
Potentially, yes. And again, the impact isn't just macro. The source specifically mentions households in states like Kerala, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar as being particularly vulnerable because they rely heavily on these funds.
What about the arguments against the tax itself? Does the source cover criticism?
It does. Critics argue it might not even work as a deterrent for, say, unauthorized migration, if that's a goal. People are motivated to support families. They'll likely still send money somehow.
So the argument is it just hurts families and the Indian economy.
Yeah, critics say it could restrict household budgets, reduce savings in India, maybe even weaken investment in financial assets there without achieving the intended U.S. policy aims. It might just push money underground.
And crucially, this is still just a proposal, right?
Yes, very important point from the source. It needs to pass the U.S. Senate, get signed by the president. It's not law yet.
But the fact it's being seriously discussed and the potential impact is so large for India, that's why it's a major headline.
Exactly. It forces analysis and raises concerns about what could happen.
For you listening, this is a clear example of how international politics, specifically U.S. policy here, can directly hit home, affecting both the national economy and individual family finances in India. Shows that global interconnectedness.
Okay, next up, we're diving into the complex world where military actions meet domestic politics in India.
Ah, yes. This source looks at the political debate around a recent military strike against Pakistani terror infrastructure. The operation was codenamed Operation Sindoor. Right, and the context, according to the source, was this operation being a direct response to that awful Pahalgam attack, which killed 26 civilians.
A major trigger event. So what did the military action involve?
The source reports that on May 7th, Indian armed forces destroyed 9 terror launch pads and reportedly killed over 100 terrorists.
A significant counterterrorism strike. But the source immediately shows how it became a political football.
Instantly. Punjab Congress Chief Amarinder Singh Rajowaring is quoted accusing both the ruling BJP and the Aam Aadmi Party, AAP, of politicizing it.
Politicizing it how?
He slammed the BJP for trying to take political credit for the military success, and he even contrasted Operation Sindoor with Operation Lotus.
Operation Lotus, that's the term critics use for alleged BJP efforts to topple opposition state governments, right?
Exactly. So Waring's drawing that parallel. It's a sharp political jab. He's basically accusing the BJP of treating a national security success like a domestic political power grab.
Framing it as using the military's achievement for narrow political gain. That's strong stuff.
And Waring didn't stop there. He also criticized the AAP's Bhagwant Mann, the Punjab chief minister, who had apparently questioned the operation's effectiveness.
So Mann doubted if the operation was successful.
Seems so. And Waring called Mann's questioning unfortunate and unbecoming.
Wow. So you've got the ruling party, BJP, celebrating it, one opposition party, AAP, questioning its effectiveness, and another opposition leader, Waring from Congress, criticizing both of them.
Right. Criticizing the BJP for politicizing it and AAP for questioning the military itself. It shows the different angles politicians take.
A very tangled political web around a military event. Did other Congress leaders share Mann's skepticism or Waring's view?
Well, the source says skepticism about the operation's success wasn't just Mann. Other senior Congress figures, Kharge, Rahul Gandhi, Jairam Ramesh, Pawan Khera, also expressed doubts.
Okay, so that suggests a broader opposition tendency to scrutinize the government's claims about the operation.
But then, complicating things within Congress, the source notes their own MP, Shashi Tharoor, actually praised the Modi government's military response.
Oh, interesting. So Tharoor broke ranks with the party's senior leadership on this.
Apparently so. Which highlights just how tricky it is for parties to find a unified stance on national security issues, especially when there's a perceived success. Creates splits even within the same party.
Definitely shows the internal dynamics and perhaps different philosophies on when and how to criticize the government on military matters.
So what was Waring's main point then, trying to navigate this?
His core argument, as presented in the source, seems to be about drawing a line. He urged respect for the Defense Force's dignity. He said questioning the BJP's motives for using the operation politically is fair game.
Okay.
But doubting the capabilities of the armed forces themselves, that's unacceptable in his view.
So separate the political criticism of the government from criticism of the military institution.
Exactly. Protect the military from getting dragged into the political mudslinging. Debate the government's narrative, not the soldiers' actions.
So this headline really isn't just about the operation itself. It's about how it was immediately viewed through India's political prism.
Yeah, becoming a flashpoint for debates about credit, effectiveness, and where the line should be drawn when commenting on national security.
For you, the listener, this gives a fascinating look into that often tense relationship between military action, security, and domestic politics in India. Shows how defense achievements can become points of political contention. All right, let's shift from military matters to the mechanics of democracy and political representation. Our next source digs into concerns from southern Indian states about the upcoming census-linked delimitation exercise.
Delimitation, right. This is the process of redrawing electoral constituency boundaries.
Exactly. And it usually happens based on population figures from the latest census. It determines how many seats each state gets in parliament and state assemblies.
Okay, so population equals political power, basically.
Pretty much. And the force focuses on concerns raised by Tamil Nadu's Chief Minister M.K. Stalin.
What's his main worry?
He fears that this process, tied strictly to population, could end up weakening the political influence of southern states.
Why specifically southern states?
Because, generally speaking, they've had lower population growth rates compared to some northern states over the past few decades. This is often linked to factors like higher development, literacy rates, more successful family planning programs.
Ah, I see. So the concern is that states which have arguably been more successful in controlling population growth might actually lose political representation, lose seats in parliament as a result.
That's precisely the fear articulated by Stalin, according to the source. He argues these southern states contribute massively to India's economy, and their representation shouldn't be diminished just because their population hasn't grown as fast.
It's a really fundamental debate about fairness in a federal system, isn't it? How do you balance pure population numbers against other contributions, like economic output or even success in meeting national policy goals like population management?
It is a very complex question. Has the central government responded to these concerns?
Yes, your source mentions the Union Ministry of Home Affairs, MHA, has responded. Home Minister Amit Shah has apparently given assurances multiple times that the concerns of southern states will be addressed in the process.
Assurances are good, but what does addressed actually mean in this context? Does the source say?
Not specifically how. It does mention that all stakeholders will be consulted, suggesting an ongoing dialogue. Addressing concerns could mean various things, maybe finding ways to weight representation differently, not just purely on population, or perhaps adjusting how constituencies are drawn. But the source focuses on the assurance and the plan for consultation, not the specific mechanism.
Okay, so the how is still unclear, and this whole process depends on the census, which has been delayed.
Right. The source explains the census was due in 2021 but got postponed because of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Why did the pandemic delay it?
The disruption affected everything, including finding the roughly 3 million enumerators needed. Many are primary school teachers, and their availability was crucial but impacted by school closures and other pandemic responses.
Makes sense. So the delay gives more time for this debate to play out.
It does. More time for consultations before the delimitation process actually kicks off based on new data.
And Stalin raising this at a Joint Action Committee meeting suggests a coordinated effort.
Likely, yes. It implies southern states or concerned groups are organizing to voice these concerns collectively. The source notes this issue is sparking a big debate about governance and federalism.
And the outcome.
Well, the source says southern states will push hard for fair representation and transparency. How this is ultimately handled will shape India's political landscape for a long time.
For you, the listener, this might seem a bit technical delimitation, census data, but it's fundamentally about how your vote translates into power. It shows how population shifts can alter the political balance in a federal country and sparks critical debates about fairness, regional representation, and the very structure of democracy. Let's pivot now to the world of global tech and manufacturing. Our next source brings news about Apple expanding its partnership with India's Tata Group.
Ah, yes, this is a significant move. Apple is handing over the responsibility for repairing iPhones and MacBooks in India to Tata.
Why is that so significant?
Well, two main reasons, according to the source. First, it signals Tata's growing importance within Apple's complex global supply chain. Second, it's seen as part of Apple's broader strategy to look beyond China, diversifying its operations.
Who was doing the repairs before?
It was Wistron's Indian unit, ICT Service Management Solutions. Now, Tata is taking over that mandate.
And where will Tata do these repairs?
Interestingly, they'll do it from their existing iPhone assembly campus in Karnataka. So they're integrating repair services right alongside manufacturing.
Okay, so integrating service with production. Does this mean the regular Apple service centers are closing?
No, the source clarifies that Apple's official service centers will still handle basic repairs, but the more complex issues, those will get routed to this new Tata facility. It's about building a more comprehensive service system linked to the Indian manufacturing base.
And India's role as a production hub for Apple has been growing, right?
Yeah.
Especially with U.S.-China tensions.
Definitely. The source gives some striking numbers. Apple sold 11 million iPhones in India in 2024. Its market share jumped from just 1% in 2020 to 7% in 2024.
That's huge growth. And more phones sold means more need for repairs down the line.
Exactly. The market is maturing, so expanding the repair infrastructure with a major local partner like Tata makes perfect sense. It's a necessary step to support that growing user base.
The source also hints at another possibility this partnership could enable.
Oh yeah, what's that?
The idea that Apple might start selling refurbished devices directly in India, like they do in the U.S. and other markets.
Ah, that would be interesting. It could open up the Apple ecosystem to more consumers at a lower price point, and it gives them a channel to manage returned or repaired devices. Building the repair infra first could be a stepping stone to that.
And adding weight to India's importance, Tim Cook himself commented recently.
Apple CEO, what did he say?
He mentioned that a large portion of iPhones sold in the U.S. during the June quarter were actually manufactured in India.
Wow. That's a powerful statement from the top. Really confirms India's rising role in their global manufacturing strategy. Even if, as the source notes, Apple and Wistron haven't commented directly on this specific repair handover yet.
So this Tata partnership feels like a very concrete example of those big global manufacturing shifts we hear about.
Absolutely. Major tech companies strategically expanding in places like India, driven by market growth, supply chain de-risking, and geopolitical factors. They're building end-to-end capabilities now, manufacturing and service.
For you listening, This shows how global tech giants are reshaping their operations. India is playing a much bigger role, not just as a market, but as a hub. And it might even mean new options for consumers later, like those refurbished devices. Staying with manufacturing, but shifting to the high-stakes defense sector now. Our next source details a major partnership between France's Dassault Aviation and India's Tata Advanced Systems.
Dassault, the makers of the Rafale fighter jet. What's the partnership about?
They're teaming up to manufacture Rafale fuselages, the main body of the aircraft, in Hyderabad, India.
Manufacturing Rafale fuselages in India. That sounds like a big deal.
It is. The source explicitly says this is the first time that production of these key structural parts of the Rafale will happen outside of France. A landmark move.
Wow. And this fits right into India's strategic goals, doesn't it?
Perfectly. It directly supports the Make in India push to boost domestic defense manufacturing. And it also helps India's goal of increasing its own arms exports.
Right. The source mentioned India's arms exports grew 12% last fiscal year, reaching $2.76 billion. This project could contribute significantly to that in the future.
So Tata Advanced Systems will set up a dedicated facility in Hyderabad for these complex fuselage sections.
Do we know when production might start?
The first sections are expected around 2028, according to the source. And the plan is for the facility to eventually produce up to 2 complete fuselages per month.
2 a month. That's a serious capacity. And are these just for India's own Rafales?
No. And this is key. Tata stated the fuselages are intended for both India's needs and for global markets. The source didn't mention the financial details, though.
That dual-focus domestic and export is really important. It positions India not just as a user, but as a potential supplier in the global aerospace supply chain for a cutting-edge fighter jet. Manufacturing a fuselage is highly complex work.
It is. And India already operates 36 Rafales, plus they recently signed a huge $7 billion deal with France for 26 naval versions, expected by 2030.
So this manufacturing partnership supports those acquisitions and India's broader military modernization drive. The source puts this in the context of tensions with Pakistan and China, right?
Yes, explicitly mentioning the need for advanced air power capabilities given the regional security situation.
And the source included that brief but relevant point about recent clashes.
It did. Mentioning the deployment of Indian jets in recent clashes with Pakistan after that Kashmir attack. It touched on the conflicting claims about downed aircraft, Pakistan claiming 3 Rafales, no evidence cited. A U.S. official reportedly confirming 1 Rafale down. India acknowledging losses but giving no details.
Even if the details are contested, that anecdote underscores why modernizing the Air Force with platforms like the Rafale and now building parts domestically is such a critical priority for India. It highlights the real-world operational context.
Absolutely. So this Dassault-Tata partnership looks like a major strategic step. Enhances India's defense capability, builds indigenous tech capacity, strengthens ties with France, and boosts India's aerospace profile globally.
It's about moving up the defense manufacturing value chain, definitely. Building critical systems locally.
For you, the listener, this headline really shows how international defense deals work and illustrates India's ambition to become a significant defense manufacturer and exporter, not just an importer. Connects global industry trends to India's strategic needs. Okay, let's switch now to the economy, specifically monetary policy. Our next source talks about a debate heating up among economists in India.
That's the debate about.
It's about the size of the next interest rate cut from India's central bank, the Monetary Policy Committee, or MPC.
Ah, the repo rate. Where does it stand now?
It's at 6% after 2 cuts of 25 basis points earlier this year. Remember, a basis point, BPS, is just 0.01%, so 25 BPS is 0.25%.
Right. So what's the standard expectation for the next move?
According to an ET survey mentioned in the source, most economists expect another standard 25 BPs cut. That seems to be the consensus view.
But there's a debate, you said.
Yes, some prominent experts are arguing for a bolder move, a larger cut of 50 basis points.
50 BPS. Who's arguing for that and why?
Your source names experts from places like SBI and Piramal Enterprises. Their argument is that a bigger cut is needed to really kickstart the credit cycle again and counteract economic uncertainty. They feel 50 BPs would accelerate momentum and maybe make up for lost time in policy action.
Okay, let's unpack that logic. A repo rate cut makes it cheaper for banks to borrow from the central bank,
Which should lead to cheaper loans for businesses and consumers.
stimulating borrowing, spending, investment, and boosting the economy. So the 50 BPs argument is basically that 25 BPs might be too small to have a real impact. A bit like pushing on a string.
That seems to be the idea. They think a more decisive cut is needed to really move the needle on borrowing costs and
But
confidence.
wait, hasn't India's growth been pretty strong? The source mentions the GDP numbers.
It does. Q4 growth was 7.4%, better than expected. Full-year growth 6.5%, keeping India as the fastest-growing major economy. Strong headline numbers for sure.
So why the push for aggressive rate cuts if growth is already strong?
Well, the economists favoring the bigger cut are looking underneath those headline numbers. Your source mentions concerns like uneven demand growth. Some sectors doing well, others maybe not so much.
Okay, patches of weakness despite the overall strength.
Right. And they also point to recent regulatory curbs on unsecured loans, which apparently weakened retail credit demand. So maybe some specific drags on the economy that need addressing.
And they mention real interest rates too.
Yes, arguing that high real interest rates, the nominal rate minus inflation, are holding back growth. A bigger cut would lower those real borrowing costs more significantly.
Makes sense. And what about the credit growth forecast?
The source includes SBI's forecast for FY26 credit growth at 10–11%, which is actually down from 12.1% in FY25.
Ah, so a projected slowdown in lending. That would definitely fuel the argument for a bigger rate cut now to try and prevent that slowdown.
Exactly. Now, the key thing enabling this debate is inflation.
Where's inflation sitting?
Currently below 4%, according to the source. Food prices are expected to keep CPI inflation around 3.6% in FY26, maybe rising slightly to 4.1% in FY27.
Okay, so inflation is relatively low and seems under control. That gives the MPC room to maneuver, right?
Precisely. The source says the inflation data opens room for rate cuts, potentially down to 5.5% for the repo rate, while still keeping the real interest rate positive, maybe around 1.5%.
So they can cut without immediately worrying about stoking inflation?
Seems to be the case, and the decision is imminent. The source says it's expected tomorrow morning, Friday, June 7th.
Wow, so this debate is happening right on the eve of the decision. The MPC has a choice. The cautious, expected 25 BPs cut, or the bolder 50 BPs move advocated by some to give the economy a stronger push.
It's a classic central bank dilemma.
For you listening, this gets right into the mechanics of how central banks try to manage the economy, weighing growth, inflation, credit trends. These decisions on interest rates directly affect borrowing costs for everyone and shape the economic outlook.
Okay, let's move from broad economic policy to a very specific, very public, and long-running legal drama. Our next source covers recent comments by businessman Vijay Mallya.
Ah, Vijay Mallya. The former head of Kingfisher Airlines, he's been in the news for years.
He has, facing multiple charges in India fraud, money laundering tied to the huge debts of his failed airline, and he's been living in the UK since March 2016, as the source reminds us.
So what are his latest comments? Where did he make them?
He gave an interview on a podcast with someone named Raj Shamani, and he talked about his legal troubles and, interestingly, laid out conditions for potentially returning to India.
Conditions for return, what are they?
He said he'd consider returning if he could be assured of two things: a fair trial and being allowed to live a dignified existence.
Fair trial and dignified existence. That phrasing is loaded. It implies he currently believes he wouldn't get either in India.
That's certainly the impression it gives, is his way of framing his situation, casting doubt on the process awaiting him back home from his perspective.
Did he address the labels often attached to him, like fugitive?
He did. He acknowledged being labeled a fugitive for leaving India when he did, but he strongly contested being called a thief.
How did he counter the thief label?
He stated flatly there was no theft, and he reiterated his claim that he didn't flee India in March 2016. He left on a pre-scheduled visit.
So he's actively trying to control the narrative there, distinguishing between the labels, framing his departure as routine, not as escaping justice, trying to reshape public perception.
Seems like it. He also brought up some legal arguments in the interview, according to your source.
Like what?
He referenced UK court rulings in other cases where extradition requests to India were blocked.
On what grounds?
Concerns that detention conditions in India might violate Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights, the point about prohibiting torture or inhuman treatment. Mallya suggested similar concerns could apply to him.
Okay, so he's trying to leverage human rights arguments and UK legal precedents to bolster his case against being extradited. Smart legal maneuvering, trying to create parallels.
But his legal battles aren't all going his way, are they?
No. The source mentions a recent setback. The London High Court rejected his appeal against a bankruptcy order.
And that bankruptcy relates to.
That massive 11,101 crore debt owed to Indian lenders, like SBI. So while he fights extradition on criminal charges, the civil process to recover the money is still moving forward against him in the UK.
It's a multi-front legal war. And he's also fighting back in India.
Yes, the source notes he filed a petition in the Karnataka High Court back in February 2025.
What was that petition about?
He argued that the banks have already recovered 14,000 crore by selling his assets. He claims this is more than the original principal debt of around 6,200 crore, yet they're still pursuing recovery efforts. So he's challenging the recovery process itself within India, claiming they've already recovered more than what was originally owed. That adds another complex layer. The court issued notices on that petition, apparently.
It did. So despite all these legal actions and public statements from Malaya, what's the bottom line?
India's efforts to extradite him continue, and his actual return is still very uncertain. And notably, your source points out the Indian government hasn't responded publicly to these specific podcast claims by Malaya.
Interesting. Maybe they're sticking to formal channels, not getting drawn into a media debate with him?
Could be. They might see his comments as aimed at public opinion or justifying his absence.
For you, the listener, this is just a fascinating high-profile case study. Touches on huge corporate debt, international law, extradition battles, human rights arguments, and how individuals facing serious charges try to manage the narrative. Finance, law, PR, all intersecting globally. Okay, moving on. Our next source takes us into a really critical area for modern industry and national strategy. India's push for self-reliance in rare earth magnets.
Rare earth magnets. Sounds niche, but they are incredibly important.
Absolutely essential, right? Your source lists them as critical for cars, especially EVs.
Clean energy, like wind turbines.
And advanced defense systems.
Yeah.
They're the hidden power behind so many motors and sensors we rely on.
And why the big push for self-reliance now? What's the vulnerability?
China. Your source states China controls something like 90% of the global processing for these magnets. And they've recently restricted exports, flexing that muscle.
90% control. That's huge dominance. Creates a massive dependency for everyone else. If they restrict exports, it can cause major supply chain disruptions.
Exactly. So India's response, according to the source, they're negotiating with companies, planning to build stockpiles, and offering incentives for domestic production.
What kind of incentives?
The Ministry of Heavy Industries is drafting a scheme to basically subsidize the cost. They want to partly fund the price difference between Indian-made magnets and cheaper Chinese imports to make local production competitive.
Ah, an industrial policy move, trying to level the playing field economically to encourage investment in domestic manufacturing facilities.
Right. And the interesting thing is, India has the raw materials. Your source notes, India has the world's third largest rare earth reserves. A state company, IRL, even mines some.
So the raw material is there. Why the dependence on imports then?
It seems the bottleneck is in the processing and manufacturing stages. The source mentions limited private investment, historically, in developing these capabilities within India, despite the reserves.
So the geology is favorable, but the industrial capacity hasn't followed until perhaps now with this push.
Exactly. And the government's trying to fix that with multiple initiatives. There's the National Critical Mineral Mission, launched in April, to boost domestic mining and processing.
Okay, supporting the whole value chain.
And they're also considering other things, like tariff exemptions on machinery needed to set up these plants.
So a multi-pronged strategy. Encourage mining, subsidize production, maybe ease import costs for the necessary equipment. Seems comprehensive.
And the urgency is real. The source gives a concrete example. Suzuki Motor Japan had to suspend production of its Swift car because of China's export curbs on these magnets.
Wow, a major car model halted because of these specific components. That shows just how critical they are and how vulnerable supply chains can be.
No kidding. Yeah. The source even says some Indian companies fear production halts by late June if supply isn't sorted out. That's immediate pressure.
So this isn't just a long-term strategic goal. It's become an urgent economic security issue. Securing the supply of these magnets is vital for India's manufacturing future in key sectors.
Absolutely. Reducing that vulnerability to external disruptions is key.
For you listening, this dives into that critical intersection of geology, global supply chains, geopolitics, and industrial strategy, shows how these often invisible components are vital, and how nations are scrambling to secure their own supplies and production.
And finally, we land on a really intriguing story involving international diplomacy and conflicting narratives. This one's about the India-Pakistan ceasefire from last month.
Okay, what's the new development?
Russia has officially endorsed Donald Trump's claim that he played a role in brokering that ceasefire.
Russia is backing Trump's claim. That's interesting, especially because, as your source points out, India has repeatedly denied any third-party mediation.
Exactly. India's stance has been firm. No outside brokers involved.
So, how did this Russian endorsement come about?
During a phone call between Trump and Vladimir Putin on June 4th, Putin's aide, Yuri Ushakov, later stated that the ceasefire was achieved not without Trump's personal involvement. They apparently discussed Ukraine, West Asia, and the India-Pakistan conflict on that call.
Wow. So, Russia, in a high-profile context, publicly sides with Trump's version, directly contradicting India's account. The source doesn't speculate why Russia did this, but the fact they did adds a whole new wrinkle.
It certainly does, and predictably, this has caused ripples in India's domestic politics too.
How so?
Your source says the main opposition, Congress, jumped on it. They're demanding clarification from PM Modi. Congress leader Jairam Ramesh even posted on social media, basically asking if Trump really did halt the conflict, using the Russian statement to question the government's narrative.
So the opposition is using this external claim to put pressure on the government domestically. Shows how international statements can become political ammunition at home.
And Trump himself has apparently repeated this claim multiple times, even saying his administration prevented a bad nuclear war.
Upping the ante significantly with that framing, portraying himself as a critical peacemaker preventing catastrophe.
Meanwhile, India's counter-narrative remains unchanged, according to your source.
What is India's official version again?
That the ceasefire was purely a bilateral agreement between India and Pakistan, and crucially, that it was initiated by Pakistan on May 10th, after they suffered severe damage from Indian missile and drone strikes during that 4-day conflict.
Okay, so India's version is, our military action forced Pakistan to ask for a ceasefire, no third party needed or involved. Completely different from the Trump-Russia narrative.
Exactly. And this fits India's long-standing policy. Bilateral issues with Pakistan resolved bilaterally. They cite the Simla Agreement, the Lahore Declaration frameworks for direct talks, rejecting third-party mediation.
And the source also mentioned PM Modi's stance on nuclear deterrence.
Yes, noting he has dismissed nuclear blackmail as something that would stop India from responding militarily to cross-border terrorism, reinforcing India's resolve.
So you have these completely conflicting stories about how the ceasefire came about. Washington via Trump, Moscow backing Trump, and New Delhi with its firm bilateral account.
It's a fascinating mess of competing narratives, a real case study in diplomatic messaging and how different actors try to shape the historical record of events to suit their own purposes.
Absolutely. For you, the listener, this has major geopolitical angles. Shows how differently global events can be portrayed, how past diplomatic frameworks still matter, and just how contested international narratives can become.
Wow, okay. We have really covered a lot of ground today, just working through the sources you provided. It's quite a journey.
It really has. From the cricket pitch and leadership transitions
To the tragic lessons from that stampede.
the potential economic shocks from U.S. tax policy,
The political sparring over military operations.
fundamental debates on political representation,
Shifts in global tech manufacturing, major defense deals.
debates over interest rates, that complex Malia saga, the push for rare earth self-reliance.
And finally, those clashing international narratives about the ceasefire. A really diverse snapshot.
It truly is a compelling cross-section of India's pulse, just from those headlines you gave us for June 6, 2025, each one offering a unique window.
And that was the whole point of this deep dive, wasn't it? To take the material you shared, focus just on that, and pull out the key insights, connect the dots where possible, and highlight the crucial details.
Exactly. We hope that by unpacking these specific sources, you've gained a deeper understanding of these particular issues as they were reported on that day, based entirely on the information provided.
So just to leave you with a final thought to chew on, something that connects a couple of threads from today's sources.
Okay.
We heard economists debating whether India needs a bigger 50 basis point rate cut to really stimulate the economy and boost credit.
Right, the push for more domestic stimulus.
And almost in the same breath, we discussed a potential U.S. tax policy that could significantly reduce the flow of remittance money into India, potentially squeezing household budgets for millions.
Ah, interesting juxtaposition. Domestic push versus potential external drag.
Exactly. So as India tries to manage its own economic levers for growth, while also dealing with these global economic forces and policy shifts from other countries, how do those two pressures, the internal push for stimulus and the external threat to income, actually interact? How does that shape the real financial lives and opportunities for ordinary citizens across India?
That's a really complex interplay, isn't it? Connecting the global directly to the personal finances. Lots to think about there.
It is indeed. Well, thank you so much for providing the sources that made this deep dive possible today. It's been genuinely fascinating to explore them with you.
Always a pleasure to dig into the material.